The cornfields of Iowa in late July are a deceptive ocean of gold. To a stranger, they look like prosperity, row after row of towering stalks swaying in the humid breeze. But to Margaret Maggie Sullivan, they felt like a labyrinth. As she sat in the passenger seat of their silver Buick, her husband Arthur's hand steady on the wheel, she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. 4 decades, Maggie, Arthur said, his voice a low, comforted rumble. He glanced at her, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. At 70, Arthur still carried the broad-shouldered posture of the young soldier he had been in the late 70s. 40 years since we said I do in that little chapel in Dubuque. Who would have thought we'd be celebrating it at our son's own estate? Maggie tried to smile, but it felt like a brittle mask. Julian has done well for himself, hasn't he? He's a Sullivan, Arthur replied with a hint of pride. Hard work is in the blood. Maggie looked out the window. She wanted to believe that. She had spent 38 years convincing herself that Julian's ambition was just hard work. When he was 10, he sold his younger sister's toys at a yard sale and kept the profit. Maggie had called it entrepreneurial spirit and bought Sarah new toys. When he was 22 and lost the down payment they gave him for his first apartment in a bad investment, she had dipped into her secret savings to cover him so Arthur wouldn't find out. She was a fixer, a weaver of safety nets. But as they turned onto the long, private gravel road leading to Julian's farmhouse, the safety net felt more like a noose. The invitation had been oddly specific. "Come early, Mom, just the 2 of you. I want to give you and Dad a private tour of the new acreage before the rest of the family and the caterers arrive at 5. Wear comfortable shoes." It was currently 2:30 p.m. The sun was a punishing weight in the sky. As the house came into view, a sprawling, white-clapboard structure that looked more like a fortress than a home, Maggie saw a flash of white through the trees. It wasn't a caterer's van. It was a nondescript white Ford Transit, tucked deep into the shade of the old oaks near the equipment shed. There were no logos on the side, no Pete's Catering or Party Rentals, just a cold, blank metal box. "Arthur, stop," Maggie said. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the authority of 30 years in a classroom. Arthur frowned, his foot hovering over the brake. "What? We're almost there, Maggie. Julian is standing right there on the porch." Maggie looked at her son. Julian stood at the top of the stairs, dressed in a crisp linen shirt and dark slacks. He looked like the picture of a successful Midwestern businessman. But he wasn't waving. He wasn't smiling. He was standing perfectly still, his phone pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on their car like a hawk watching a field mouse. "Turn the car around, Arthur," Maggie said, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. "Now." "Maggie, you're being dramatic. It's the heat. Julian's been planning this for months." "Arthur Sullivan, look at his face," Maggie hissed. Arthur looked. In that moment, Julian lowered the phone. He didn't offer a welcoming gesture. Instead, he signaled to someone behind him, a sharp cutting motion with his hand. From behind the white van, 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing aprons. They were wearing heavy work jackets in 90-degree heat, their hands tucked deep into their pockets. The instinct that had protected Maggie's children for decades suddenly turned its fangs on the child who was supposed to be her pride. Every hair on her arms stood up. This wasn't a celebration. It was an extraction. "Arthur, reverse! Now!" Something in Maggie's tone finally bypassed Arthur's stubbornness. He slammed the car into reverse just as the 2 men started running toward the driveway. Gravel screamed under the Buick's tires as Arthur whipped the steering wheel around, the back end of the car fishtailing wildly. "What is happening?" Arthur gasped, his face paling as he saw the men in the rearview mirror. "Those aren't Julian's friends, Maggie. They're his shadows," Maggie whispered, her hands clenching the dashboard. As they sped back toward the main county road, Maggie's phone buzzed in the center console. It was a text from Julian. Her thumb trembled as she swiped it open. "Don't be foolish, Mom. You won't make it to the highway. And remember, Dad left his nitro pills in his blazer on the kitchen chair this morning. I have them. He won't last 2 hours in this heat without them. Come back, and we can talk like a family." Maggie felt the world tilt. She looked at Arthur. He was breathing heavily, his hand instinctively fluttering toward his chest. He always kept his heart medication in his left pocket. It was his lifeline. "Arthur," she breathed, her voice cracking. Did you grab your pills this morning?" Arthur's eyes widened. He patted his pocket, then his other pocket. His face went from pale to a terrifying shade of gray. I thought I put them in my slacks. No, I put them in the blazer. Maggie, where's the blazer? Julian has them, she said, the words tasting like ash. The first twist hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a financial trap. Julian hadn't just invited them for a signature. He had engineered a medical hostage situation. He had sat in their kitchen the night before, sipping coffee, watching his father, and waited for the moment Arthur set his medication down to swipe it. "We have to go to the hospital," Arthur wheezed, the stress already constricting his chest. "No," Maggie said, her mind racing with a cold, terrifying clarity. "If we go to the hospital, we have to go through the town. There's only one road, and Julian knows it. He'll have those men waiting at the crossroads." She looked back. The white van had emerged from the driveway and was gaining on them, a ghost in the dust. "He thinks I'm the same woman who hid his report cards," Maggie muttered to herself, her eyes hardening. "He thinks I'm the woman who paid off his bookies and told his father he was just helping a friend. He thinks I'm weak because I loved him." She reached for the steering wheel, helping Arthur guide the car as his hands began to shake. "Keep driving, Arthur. Do not head for the town. Take the old logging trail behind Miller's Pond. It's overgrown, but the Buick can handle it. We're going to Sarah's." "Sarah is 2 hours away," Arthur coughed. "I don't have 2 hours, Maggie." "You have me," Maggie said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out an old, crumpled emergency inhaler she kept for her own mild asthma. It wasn't heart medication, but the bronchodilator would help him breathe if the panic got too bad. "And you have the truth. We are not going back into that cage." As they veered off the paved road and into the thick canopy of the woods, the white van slowed, hesitant to follow them into the jagged terrain. But Maggie knew Julian. He wouldn't give up. He was drowning in debt, and he had decided that his parents' life's work was the only life raft left. She looked at her phone again. A new message was coming in. This one wasn't from Julian. It was from her grandson, Leo, Julian's 12-year-old son. "Grandma, help! Dad is acting scary. He said Grandpa is sick in the head and trying to take the farm away from us. He said you're helping him. He told me if I see your car, I have to let the security guys know. Grandma, please tell me he's lying." Maggie felt a sob catch in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Julian wasn't just stealing their money and their health. He was stealing the hearts of the next generation. He was turning her grandson into a lookout for a crime he didn't even understand. "I'm coming for you, Leo," Maggie whispered to the screen, her jaw set. "But first I have to save your grandfather from the man I raised." The Buick bounced violently over a hidden root, and Arthur let out a sharp cry of pain, clutching his chest. The clock was ticking. The sun was setting. And the son she had nurtured for nearly 40 years had just declared war on the very blood that gave him life. The Buick's suspension groaned as it cleared a jagged limestone ridge, the thick scent of damp pine and crushed ferns filling the cabin. Maggie's eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, watching for the telltale plume of dust that would mean the white van had committed to the trail. For a moment, there was only the oppressive green of the forest and the frantic thrumming of her own pulse. "Maggie, I can't. The air feels like lead," Arthur wheezed. His knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, his head lolling slightly. "Pull over, Arthur. Right here, under the weeping willow," Maggie commanded. The car rolled to a stop, the engine ticking as it cooled. Maggie didn't hesitate. She scrambled out of her seat and ran to the driver's side, helping Arthur slide into the passenger position. His skin was clammy, a sheen of cold sweat coating his forehead. "Listen to me, Artie," she whispered, using the pet name from their college days. "I'm going to use the inhaler. It's not your nitro, but it will open the airways. You have to stay calm. If your heart rate spikes, we're in real trouble." She shook the canister, her hands surprisingly steady, and coached him through 2 deep puffs. She watched his chest heave, then slowly settle. The gray tint in his cheeks receded just enough to let her breathe again. He planned this," Arthur managed to say, his voice a ghost of its former self. "Julian, he sat at our table and ate your pot roast while he was planning to let me die." "He's not Julian right now, Artie. He's a cornered animal," Maggie said, though her heart felt like it had been shredded. She put the car in gear and began navigating the narrow, muddy path that led toward the back exit of Miller's Pond. As she drove, her mind drifted back to Julian's wedding. Becca had been a vision in lace, but Maggie remembered the way the girl had looked at the Sullivan family farm, not with love, but with the calculated gaze of an appraiser. Maggie had dismissed it as her own mother-in-law nerves. Now she realized Becca hadn't been marrying a man. She had been acquiring an asset. Maggie's phone chimed again, a FaceTime request from Leo. Her heart leaped. If she could see him, she could tell him the truth. She hit accept. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't Leo's smiling face. It was Leo, huddled in the dark of what looked like the equipment shed, his eyes wide and red from crying. "Grandma?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "He's screaming at Mom. He said you and Grandpa are unstable. He told the men with the van that if they find the Buick, they should do whatever it takes to get the blue folder from your trunk." Maggie's blood ran cold. The blue folder. It contained the original deeds to the 300 acres of Sullivan timberland, land that Julian had been begging them to put in his name for years. "Leo, listen to me very carefully," Maggie said, keeping her voice low. "Grandpa is okay, but we need you to be a brave boy. Did your dad say where those men are now?" "They're heading to the highway," Leo sobbed. "But Grandma, Dad told the police you were kidnapping me. I heard him on the phone. He said you lost your mind and took me from the porch." Maggie nearly hit a tree. Julian had gone nuclear. By reporting her for kidnapping, he had ensured that every law enforcement officer in the state would be looking for their silver Buick. He wasn't just chasing them, he was using the law to trap them. "He's framed us, Arthur," Maggie said, her voice hollow. "He's told the police I've kidnapped Leo." Arthur closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. "Our own son. He's turned the world against us." "Not the whole world," Maggie snapped, a sudden spark of defiance lighting up her eyes. "He forgot about Sarah." Maggie dialed her daughter. Sarah was the difficult child, the one who refused to back down from an argument and moved to the city to become a public defender. Maggie and Sarah had clashed for years, mostly because Sarah saw through Julian's lies long before Maggie was willing to admit them. "Mom, why are you calling me 4 times? I thought you were at the great Julian coronation today." Sarah's voice came through, sharp and weary. "Sarah, I need you to listen and don't interrupt," Maggie said, her voice cracking. "Julian has taken your father's nitro pills. He sent men after us. He's reported me for kidnapping Leo. We're on the logging trail behind Miller's Pond." There was a silence on the other end that lasted only 2 seconds. "I knew it," Sarah whispered, her tone shifting from sarcasm to pure protective steel. "That pathetic, greedy— Mom, listen. Do not go to the main highway. Julian has a friend in the sheriff's department, Deputy Miller. If he reported a kidnapping, Miller will be the one waiting for you." "What do we do, Sarah? Your father is struggling." "Drive to the old abandoned quarry on the north side," Sarah commanded. "It's bumpy, but Julian's city friends in that van won't risk their tires there. I'm leaving now. I'm calling a friend in the state police, someone who doesn't owe Julian any favors. And Mom?" "Yes, honey?" "Stop being a mother for a second. Start being a survivor. Julian isn't your little boy anymore. He's a predator." Maggie hung up, the words echoing in the cramped car. A predator. As they reached the edge of the woods near the quarry, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the landscape. The Buick's headlights cut through the gathering gloom, illuminating the jagged cliffs of the old limestone mine. Suddenly, a pair of bright lights flared in the rearview mirror. High beams. The white van hadn't given up. It had circled around the woods and found the quarry entrance. "They're here," Arthur whispered, his breathing becoming ragged again. Maggie pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The Buick fishtailed on the loose gravel of the quarry floor. She knew this place. She had brought Julian and Sarah here to swim when they were children, back when the world was simple and the only danger was a scraped knee. She drove deep into the heart of the quarry, towards the old crane pier that overhung the deep, dark water. "Maggie, what are you doing? We're cornered," Arthur cried out. "No, Artie," Maggie said, her eyes fixed on the approaching lights of the van. "We're choosing the battlefield." She slammed on the brakes just feet from the edge of the pier. The white van skidded to a halt 50 yards behind them, blocking the only exit. 2 men stepped out, their silhouettes framed by the harsh glare of their own headlights. And then, a third figure stepped out from the passenger side. It was Julian. He walked forward, his hands raised in a mocking gesture of peace. The wind whipped his linen shirt, making him look frail against the backdrop of the massive stone cliffs. "Mom!" "Dad!" Julian shouted, his voice echoing off the limestone walls. "Stop this! Dad needs his medicine. You're killing him out of spite. Just give me the folder and I'll give you the pills. We can tell the police it was all a big misunderstanding. I can fix this." Maggie rolled down her window just an inch. "You stole your father's life, Julian. You don't fix that with a signature." "I'm drowning, Mom." Julian's voice broke, a flash of the old, desperate child surfacing. "Becca." She made commitments. "If I don't have that land, they're going to take everything. The kids' school, the house, everything." "Then let them take it," Maggie screamed back. "At least you'd have your soul." Julian's face twisted. The mask of the grieving son vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp desperation. He turned to the men. "Get the folder. I don't care if you have to break the window." The men started forward. Maggie looked at Arthur. He reached over and took her hand. "I love you, Maggie," he whispered. "I love you too, Artie. Now hold on." Maggie didn't put the car in drive. She didn't try to ram the van. Instead, she reached into the back seat and grabbed the heavy, industrial-sized flashlight Arthur kept for emergencies. She turned it on and began flashing a rhythmic signal, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, towards the top of the quarry cliff. Suddenly, the top of the cliff erupted in blue and red lights. A voice boomed over a megaphone. "State Police! Drop your weapons and step away from the vehicle." Julian froze. He looked up, his face etched in pure terror. "Mom, what did you do?" "I called Sarah," Maggie said, her voice cold as the stone around them. And Sarah called the real law. But as the officers began to descend the narrow path into the quarry, Maggie's phone buzzed one more time. It was a video file from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a recording from a security camera inside Julian's own home, likely a hidden nanny cam Julian didn't know about. In the video, Becca was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly talking to a man who wasn't Julian. "The old man's heart is a ticking clock." Becca's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear. "Julian thinks we're saving the farm. He's too stupid to realize that once the land is in his name and he accidentally overdoses from the stress, I get the insurance, the land, and the freedom. Just make sure the security team pushes the Buick off the road. I want it to look like a tragic accident on their anniversary." Maggie stared at the screen, her breath hitching. Julian wasn't the mastermind. He was the bait. Becca hadn't just planned to rob them. She was planning a triple homicide, her in-laws and her own husband. Maggie looked out at Julian, who was currently being tackled to the gravel by 2 state troopers. He was sobbing, screaming that he was sorry. "Julian," Maggie yelled, throwing the phone out the window toward him. "Look at the video. Look at who you're protecting." As the police cuffed Julian, he stared at the screen of the phone lying in the dirt. Maggie watched as his face went from rage to a hollow, devastating realization. He collapsed into the dust, his spirit finally breaking. But the climax wasn't over. "Where is Becca?" Arthur asked, his voice stronger now as the adrenaline surged. Maggie looked at the police officers. "Where is the wife? Where is Becca Sullivan?" The sergeant walked over, his face grim. "Ma'am, we found the white van, but when we raided the farmhouse, Becca Sullivan was gone, and she took Leo with her." The world went silent for Maggie. The victory tasted like poison. She had saved Arthur, and she had exposed the fraud, but the serpent had fled the garden, and she had taken the only thing that still mattered. "She has Leo," Maggie whispered, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She turned to the sergeant, her voice no longer that of a victim, but of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "Give me a radio," Maggie said, "and tell your men to get out of my way. I know where she's going." Arthur grabbed her arm. "Maggie, no. Let the police handle it." "They don't know her, Artie. They think she's a criminal. I know she's a mother who never loved her child. That makes her the most dangerous thing on earth." Maggie Sullivan stepped back into the driver's seat. The celebration of 40 years was over. The hunt for her grandson had begun. The Midwest night doesn't just fall, it swallows. Out here, away from the hum of the city, the darkness is a physical weight, smelling of damp earth and the coming harvest. The blue and red strobe lights of the state police cruisers sliced through the limestone dust of the quarry like jagged neon knives, turning the scene into a fever dream of justice and adrenaline. Maggie stood by the Buick, her breath hitching in the cooling air. Arthur was safely tucked into an ambulance, an oxygen mask over his face, but his eyes, those steady, weary blue eyes, never left her. Julian sat on the gravel, his hands zip-tied behind his back, staring at the phone screen on the ground. The video of Becca's cold-blooded betrayal played on a loop, her voice a rhythmic poison in the silence. "Mom," Julian whispered, his voice cracking like dry timber. "I didn't know. She told me. She said it was the only way to save our legacy." Maggie walked over to her son. She didn't look at him with hatred, but with a profound, hollow pity. "A legacy built on the graves of your parents isn't a home, Julian. It's a mausoleum. And the only thing Becca is saving right now is her own skin, using your son as a shield." She turned to Sergeant Miller, who was coordinating the perimeter. "Becca Sullivan isn't a runner. She's a calculator. She won't head for the interstate. She knows you've got the plate readers active. She's heading for her grandfather's old farm north of the pond." "Why there?" Miller asked, signaling his team. "There's a private landing strip for crop dusters," Maggie said, her voice turning to flint. "Her business associate, Vince, has a Cessna. It's the only way she can disappear without a trace. And she has Leo." While the police mobilized, Maggie insisted on looking through the satchel recovered from the white van. Amidst the forged deeds and mortgage transfers, she found a nondescript yellow envelope. As she pulled out the contents, her hands went numb. They weren't land documents. They were life insurance policies, new ones, dated only 2 months ago. "Sergeant, look at this," Maggie said, her heart turning to ice. The beneficiary was Becca Sullivan. The insured? Maggie, Arthur, and Julian. But it was the double indemnity rider that made Maggie's stomach churn. Payout triples in the event of accidental death occurring during a documented family event. "She didn't just want the land," Maggie whispered, the horror rising in her throat. "She wanted a clean sweep, this reunion. It wasn't supposed to be a trap. It was supposed to be a mass funeral." Julian heard her. He let out a low, animalistic wail of grief. He realized then that he wasn't the partner in this crime. He was just another pig led to the slaughter, meant to die alongside his parents so Becca could walk away with a fortune in blood money. "I have to go," Maggie said, looking at Arthur. He nodded once, a silent, ironclad trust passing between them. Maggie didn't wait for a cruiser. She took Sarah's SUV, a rugged vehicle built for these back roads, and tore off into the night. She knew every dip, every hidden drainage pipe, every shortcut through the corn. As she neared the old airstrip, she saw the silhouette of a small plane, its engine coughing to life, the propeller a silver blur in the moonlight. A red convertible, Becca's car, was parked haphazardly near the hangar. Becca was dragging a terrified Leo toward the cabin of the plane. "Stop, Becca!" Maggie screamed, lurching her SUV to a halt and flooding the tarmac with her high beams. Becca froze, a small silver pistol glinting in her hand. Her perfect blonde hair was disheveled, her face a mask of manic desperation. "You should have stayed in the car, Maggie. You always had to be the hero, didn't you?" "You're not taking him," Maggie said, stepping out of the car, ignoring the barrel of the gun. "The police are 5 minutes behind me. It's over." "It's only over when I say," Becca shrieked. "I have the boy. They won't shoot." Suddenly another set of lights roared up the road. A police car, but it was driving erratically. It skidded to a stop, and Julian, who had somehow convinced a junior officer he could talk his wife down, or perhaps had simply escaped in the chaos, leaped out. "Becca, put it down!" Julian yelled, his voice raw. "I saw the video. I saw the insurance papers." "Stay back, Julian. You're a loser. You couldn't even handle a simple signature without crying." Becca swung the gun toward Julian. In that heartbeat, the cowardice that had defined Julian's life evaporated. He didn't look at the gun. He looked at Leo, huddled behind Becca's legs, and then he looked at his mother. "Run, Leo!" Julian screamed. As Leo bolted toward Maggie, Becca pulled the trigger. The sound was a sharp, final crack in the night. But Julian didn't stop. He tackled Becca with the full weight of his regret, driving her to the pavement just as the state police swarmed the field. The sirens were a deafening chorus now. Becca was pinned to the ground, her face pressed into the oil-stained asphalt, screaming curses that would have made a sailor blush. Maggie was on the grass, Leo clutched to her chest so tightly she could feel his heart beating against her own. But her eyes were on Julian. He lay still, a dark bloom of crimson spreading across the white linen shirt he had worn to celebrate his parents. "Julian!" Maggie cried, rushing to his side. Julian coughed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked up at the Iowa stars, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "Mom, I'm sorry. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted to be a big man like Dad." "Oh, Julian," Maggie sobbed, pressing her hand to his wound. "You were always enough. You just didn't believe it." "Save him," Julian whispered, looking at Leo one last time before his eyes fluttered shut. 6 months later, the Iowa sky was a brilliant, untroubled blue. Maggie sat on the porch swing of the Sullivan farm, the wood creaking rhythmically. Arthur sat beside her, his hand in hers, a little slower now, but with a heart that beat steady and true. Julian hadn't died, but the man he was had perished that night. He was serving 5 years in a minimum security facility for fraud and reckless endangerment, a light sentence only because he had saved his son and turned state's evidence against the predatory lenders and Becca. Becca, however, was facing life for attempted murder and conspiracy. Sarah had moved back to the county, taking a job as a local prosecutor. She spent her weekends at the farm, helping Maggie and Arthur raise Leo, Emma, and Noah while their parents were away. Leo walked out onto the porch, holding a model airplane. He was quieter now, a bit more observant, but the nightmares had stopped. "Grandma, are we still going to the lake today?" Leo asked. "Every Sunday, Leo," Maggie smiled, smoothing his hair. "The fish are waiting." Maggie looked out over the cornfields. The truth had scorched their family to the ground. It had exposed the rot and the greed and the decades of enabling. But in the ash, something cleaner was growing. She realized then that her revenge wasn't seeing Becca in a jumpsuit or Julian behind bars. Her revenge was the silence of a peaceful afternoon. It was the fact that no one was hiding in the trees. No one was forging her name. And her grandchildren could sleep without wondering if the people who loved them were lying. "The truth," Maggie whispered to the breeze, "is a hard harvest, but it's the only one that sustains you." She stood up, gathered her keys, and walked toward the Buick. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The road ahead was finally clear. The air at the abandoned airstrip was thick with the smell of aviation fuel and old regrets. Maggie pulled the SUV to a jarring halt, the headlights cutting through the darkness to reveal a scene that looked like a jagged wound on the landscape. Becca stood by the open door of the Cessna, one hand gripping Leo's arm, the other holding the silver pistol. Her eyes were no longer those of the poised daughter-in-law who brought organic kale salads to Sunday dinner. They were wide, frantic, and devoid of any maternal warmth. "Stay back, Maggie," Becca screamed over the whine of the plane's engine. "I've spent 5 years playing the good wife in this dusty, pathetic town. I am not going to jail because Julian couldn't keep his mouth shut." "It's not Julian who caught you, Becca," Maggie said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. "It was your own greed. You thought because I was a mother I was soft. You forgot that mothers are the ones who know how to prune the rot to save the tree." Just as the police sirens began to wail in the distance, another set of headlights tore across the field. It was Julian. He had somehow convinced a junior officer at the quarry to let him help, or perhaps he had simply leveraged a moment of chaos to follow his mother. He leaped out of the car before it even fully stopped. "Becca, put the gun down!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of terror and sudden, sharp clarity. "I saw the insurance papers, Becca. I saw the double indemnity clause. You weren't just going to rob my parents. You were going to kill me, too." Becca laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You were always the weak link, Julian. You're a Sullivan. You're predictable. You're just collateral." She leveled the gun at Julian. Leo screamed, "Dad!" and tried to break free. In that split second, Becca's grip loosened. Julian didn't hesitate. For the first time in 38 years, he didn't look for a shortcut. He didn't look for a lie to hide behind. He ran. He ran straight into the line of fire. Crack! The sound of the gunshot was a physical blow to the night. Julian didn't fall immediately. The momentum of his sprint carried him forward, his body slamming into Becca, pinning her against the fuselage of the plane just as the first state police cruiser swerved onto the tarmac. Maggie was moving before she even realized she had let go of the steering wheel. She grabbed Leo as he scrambled away, pulling him into the safety of the SUV's shadow. "Grandma, Dad's hurt," Leo sobbed, his face buried in her neck. "Stay here, Leo. Don't look," Maggie whispered, though her own heart felt like it was being torn from her chest. She ran toward Julian. He was on the ground now, His white linen shirt stained a deep, terrifying crimson. Becca was being wrestled into handcuffs by 3 officers, her screams of, "It wasn't me! He attacked me!" fading into the background. Maggie knelt in the oil-stained dirt, pulling Julian's head into her lap. "Julian, look at me," she pleaded, her hands pressing against the wound in his chest. "Mom," Julian wheezed, his eyes unfocused. Is he okay?" "He's safe. You saved him, Julian. You saved us all." Julian let out a ragged breath, a ghost of a smile touching his pale lips. I finally did one honest thing, didn't I?" "The most honest thing you ever did," Maggie whispered, her tears falling onto his forehead. "Now stay with me. The ambulance is coming. Don't you dare leave me now, Julian Sullivan." The recovery didn't happen in a day. It happened in the quiet, sterile hallways of the ICU, and later in the hushed rooms of the county courthouse. Julian survived, but the bullet had left scars that would ache every time the Iowa humidity rose. He didn't fight the charges. He pleaded guilty to the fraud, but because he had saved his mother and son and provided the evidence to put Becca away for life, his sentence was reduced to 5 years in a minimum security facility. Becca Sullivan, however, became a cautionary tale in the local papers. Her web of insurance fraud, attempted murder, and kidnapping earned her a sentence that ensured she would never see a Iowa sunset outside of a barbed wire fence again. 1 year later, the Sullivan farm felt different now. The blue folder was back in the bank vault, but the secrets it once protected were out in the open. Maggie sat on the porch swing, watching Sarah, now the rock of the family, toss a football with Leo in the yard. Arthur sat beside Maggie, his hand steady as he held a glass of lemonade. He had his nitro pills in his pocket, but he hadn't needed one in months. The stress of the lies had been harder on his heart than the truth ever was. "He called today," Arthur said quietly. "Julian?" "Yeah, he sounds better, clearer. He said he's teaching a business ethics class to the other inmates." "Can you believe the irony?" Maggie chuckled, a soft, genuine sound. "Maybe he's finally learning that you can't build a life on sand." Leo ran up to the porch, sweaty and smiling. "Grandma, Sarah says we're having a real reunion next week. Just the family. No security guys, right?" Maggie pulled her grandson into a side hug. "No security guys, Leo. Just us. And we're going to have the biggest peach pie you've ever seen." As Leo ran back to the game, Maggie looked out over the golden fields. She had spent a lifetime trying to protect Julian from the world, only to realize she needed to protect the world from the version of Julian she had helped create. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't an enabler. She was a Sullivan woman. Hardened by the truth, softened by grace, and finally, after 40 years, truly at peace. "Happy anniversary, Maggie," Arthur whispered, leaning his head against hers. "Happy anniversary, Artie," she replied. "We finally made it home.